We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph Meseches Yoma. This is Yoma Daf 46a. The Gemara said that when you take the fire in the fire pan into the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur, you take it from the fire that's Me'al HaMizbeach Milifnei Hashem. So the Gemara now is in the middle of saying that you have to do it from the Mizbeach that's partially Lifnei Hashem, meaning the Mizbeach HaChitzon, but you might have thought that you have to do it specifically right from the area of the Mizbeach that's in front of the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash. Maybe it has to be Milifnei Hashem Mamish. That's why it says Me'al HaMizbeach, to tell you, Aval Mehai Gisa Mehai Gisa Eimalo. I might have thought you can't take it from the various sides of the Mizbeach. Tzricha, so that's why you need both psukim to say it has to be the Mizbeach HaChitzon, but any area of the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Rashi says, Aval Mehai Gisa de Pesach Lo. I might think on the other side of the doorway would be a problem. Be'afagav de Sar Ma'arav, even though you're on the western side of the Mizbeach, but if it's at the side of the door, that's not going to be good. I might have thought that, Kamash Malon, that it is still good. And the Gemara continues, Omer Rebbe Lozer Mishum Bar Kapora. Rebbe Lozer says in the name of Bar Kapora, Omer Hoyer Rebbe Meir would say, a vore ola shenitosru, if you have a vorim from a carbon ola that are left over, osa lohen ma'arocha b'fnei atzma, you make a new arrangement of wood, b'sodron, and you can arrange it there, ve'afilu b'Shabbos, and this is true even on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, my kamash malon, what's the chiddush? Rashi over here says, my kamash malon dekamar osa lohen ma'arocha b'chol tanina. We already say in our Mishnah that you're allowed to make this other arrangement. It says, B'chol yom hayusham daled ma'arachos. It says every day, according to Rabbi Meir, there were 4 ma'arachos. That was the whole point. The extra, the fourth one, was for any limbs that had not been fully consumed that were left over. So that's exactly what we said in the Mishnah. B'chol yom hayusham arba ma'arachos. That's the quote of the Mishnah. Every day there were 4 ma'arachos. So what exactly is Bar Kapara adding that Rabbi Meir didn't already say in the Mishnah? And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Yavin says, Lo nitzrucha ela lipsulin. The chiddush over here is that Rabbi Meir would say you use this ma'aracha even for a carbon ola which is pasul. Rashi says, Lipsulin hanuchdim olu lo yirdu. There are certain carbonis that once they go on the mizbeach, you don't take them down. You let them stay on the mizbeach. Those are the psulin that we're talking about over here. So in such a situation, even in such a situation, you make a separate ma'aracha in order to burn those limbs. And the Gemara continues, V'dafka shemashla behen ha'or. This is only true if the fire started ruling over the carbon, over the limbs. Avalo mashla ben or, but if they haven't started to be consumed by the fire, lo, then it would not be allowed. You wouldn't make a separate ma'aracha for that, as Rashi over here explains. Shemashla ben ha'or, deme'ahi shaito nasu lachma shamazbeach. When the fire starts to rule over it, meaning when it's being consumed by the fire, so then it's already called the lachma shel mizbeach, the food, the bread of the mizbeach, and then again it's returned to the mizbeach in order to be burned on this extra ma'aracha. Iko diamri, there are those of a slightly different version. Echad kshein ve'echad psulin. Doesn't matter if you're talking about a carbon which is kosher or a carbon which is pasul. Imashla behen ha'or, in only if again the fire rules over it, then you return it to this ma'aracha to be burned. Ve'ilo lo, and if not, then you do not. In other words, according to this other version, this halacha of mashla behen ha'or applies whether it's kshein or psulin. And then the Gemara continues, Va'afilu b'Shabbos. Bar Kapara said that you make this ma'aracha, you arrange it for these extra parts, for these extra carbon ola evarim, even on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Tanina, that also was already learned in the Mishnah. V'hayom chamesh. It says in the Mishnah, it said every day there were 4, and today there were 5. What the Gemara means to say is, Hayom chamesh, today on Yom Kippur there were 5. The Gemara equates Yom Kippur with Shabbos. It's the same thing. Tanina hayom chamesh v'hare Yoma Kippurim k'Shabbos. Yoma Kippurim has all the dinim of Shabbos. V'katani de evare tamid shel erev Yoma Kippurim osel and marach b'Yoma Kippurim. It says if you have any evarim from the carbon tamid of the previous evening of erev Yoma Kippurim that didn't get fully burned, then you make this maracha for those evarim. So you see very clearly, even on Shabbos, you're going to do this. So again, what is Bar Kapara adding? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, Itzrich, we need this statement of Bar Kapara. You might have thought that this extra ma'aracha that you're making on Yom Kippur is specifically if Yom Kippur falls on Sunday and only if it falls on Sunday. Techel be Shabbos craven be Yom Kippurim, because there's a halacha that all the extra chaylev of Shabbos can be brought on Yom Kippur. In other words, in that case, the extra is not extra from a weekday, it's extra from Shabbos. So maybe you would say that's the one situation where you do it. Avol be'emtza Shabbos lo, but if Yom Kippurim would fall out in the middle of the week, maybe you wouldn't make this ma'arach on Yom Kippur. Kamash malon. So that's what Bar Kapara is saying. When you have again the evare ola shani tosru, you can make a ma'arach on Yom Kippur or on Shabbos, and it doesn't have to davka be Yom Kippur right after Shabbos. It can be done on any Shabbos and on any Yom Kippur. The Gemara then says, Amar Rava, Rava says, Man haidelo chayish lekimche. Who's the person who's not paying attention to his flour? Meaning, this whole idea over here that it's not in the Mishnah and Bar Kapara is adding something is not true. Read the Mishnah carefully. Ha b'chol yom tanan. It says every day there were 4, every day should include Shabbos. And the Gemara says, Kasha, that is indeed difficult. It does seem to be included in the Mishnah, so that is a difficulty in terms of what Bar Kapara is adding. And Rashi over here says, B'chol Yom, it says every day, Hayu Arba Marachos. Again, there were 4 Marachos. Tanan, that's what it says in the Mishnah. Ve'afilu Shabbos b'mashma, that implies even on Shabbos. So again, that's still a difficulty in terms of Bar Kapara. And the Gemara continues, Upliga de Rav Huna, and this argues on Rav Huna. Rashi over here says, Upliga de Rav Huna de Bar Kapara v'ad Rava. Rav Huna argues on Bar Kapara and Rava. D'amar b'chol yom d'masnisin davku v'afilu b'Shabbos, because again, Bar Kapara and Rava said every day in the Mishnah is meant to be taken literally, meaning even on Shabbos. Even on Shabbos, you have this 4th maracha to burn whatever limbs were not burned from the carbanola from the day before. The Rav Huna savar, because Rav Huna holds b'chol yom levar mi Shabbos. When it comes to burning, it means every day you have this extra maracha, except for Shabbos. On Shabbos, you do not have this extra maracha. The Yomar, because Rav Huna says tchiloso docha, the beginning of the carbon tamid is docha, sofo eno docha, but the end of the carbon tamid, meaning that which is left over, which wasn't burned right away, that is not docha. Rashi over here says tchiloso docha tamid shel Shabbos nishchat b'Shabbos v'kar b'Shabbos, meaning the carbon tamid on Shabbos in general, you're not supposed to bring karbanos on Shabbos, but the carbon tamid is an exception. You're allowed to shecht it on Shabbos, you're allowed to bring it on Shabbos, but that's all good at the beginning of offering it. But sofo eno docha, meaning tamid shel erev Shabbos, if you have the tamid from Friday, from the day before, ein evar of niktar and mishatechshach, you're not allowed to burn those evarim once it becomes dark. Elamalan mibod yom, it has to all be taken care of before Shabbos. Meaning the point over here is sofo, the end of a carbon tamid, you cannot do on Shabbos. You can't have that extra arrangement to burn any limbs that haven't yet been burned on Shabbos, because only tchilaso docha. That's Rav Huna's opinion. Again, that is against the opinion of Bar Kapara and Rava. Now the Gemara says, Gufa, analyzing Rav Huna's statement itself, Amar Rav Huna says, Tamid, when it comes to the carbon tamid, tchilaso docha, sofo eno docha, the beginning, the offering originally of the carbon tamid is docha, the end is not docha. Now, the Gemara had assumed that we're talking about being docha Shabbos. The beginning of the carbon tamid is docha Shabbos, not the end. But now the Gemara here says it's really a machlokas amoroim. My eno docha. What does it mean? The end of the carbon tamid is not docha. Rav Chisda Amar doches haShabbos ve'eno doches haTuma. Rav Chisda says the end of the carbon tamid is docha Shabbos. What it's not docha is it's not docha tuma. V'Rabba Amar, Rabba says no, the opposite. Doches haTuma, it's docha tuma. Ve'eno doches haShabbos, it's not docha Shabbos. In other words, you can bring the carbon tamid if necessary when there's a situation of tumma. So the question over here is the same question. What about sofa? What if it's the end of the carbon tamid? Can that be brought b'tumma or not? And then Shabbos also, like we said before. So this is a machlokas, Rav Chisda and Rabba. Rav Chisda says the sofa of the carbon tamid is docha Shabbos, not tumma. Rabba says the opposite. Sofa of the carbon tamid is docha tumma and not Shabbos. And Rashi over here says, Ma eno docha esat tumma hekter chalovim ve'emurin. So the first understanding Rashi has is when we're talking about the sofa, it means that it's not docha tumma, the burning of the chaylev, meaning the fats and the various limbs, ela zrikas damo bilvad. Only the zrikas hadam of the carbanola you can do betumma, but you're not allowed to do any of the burning. According to this lashon, we're not even talking about the extra, the leftover of the carbon tamid. We're talking even initially, you can't do any of the hekter chalavim ve'emurin when there's a situation of tumma. Lishna achrina, Rashi has another version, tchilaso hekter chalavim. Even the burning of the chalavim, that is okay betumma. Sofo, but the end means evarim shenitosru. Again, if you have limbs left over, similar to what we're talking about before, when you have limbs left over miba'era from the evening before, v'zeh shamati, this explanation I heard, v'harishon nira be'ena. He says, Rashi says he thinks the first opinion is more appropriate. So even within Rashi, we're not 100% sure what it means, sofa, when it comes to tamid. When we're talking about whether the sofa of the carbon tamid is docha tumma, are we talking about the burning of the chalavim ve'emurin, or are we talking about if you have a varim shenitosru leftovers, that's considered sofa? But regardless, you have this machlokas amoroim over here. What exactly does Rav Huna mean when he says sofa eno docha? And now the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaye le Rabba. So Abaye says to Rabba, L'didach kasha ula Rav Chisda kasha. According to you, it's difficult, and according to Rav Chisda, it's also difficult. L'didach kasha, according to you, I have the following difficulty. Ma'ishno tumma d'chsib b'mo'ado v'afilu b'tumma. What's the difference that by tumma, where you say it is docha tumma, and that's because the pasuk says b'mo'ado, you bring it in its time, even in a situation of tumma. Shabbos nami b'mo'ado v'afilu b'Shabbos. By Shabbos also, it says you bring it in its time, even on Shabbos. The same pasuk should allow both. Why would it only be docha tumma? Ula Rav Chisda kasha, according to Rav Chisda, we have a similar question. Ma'ishna Shabbos tichsib b'moado afilu b'Shabbos. What's the difference by Shabbos? The reason why it's docha Shabbos is because it says b'moado. Tomanami b'moado v'afilu b'tumah. When it comes to tumah also, b'moado should say it's even b'tumah. And so the Gemara continues, Amar lei, so Rabbah says back to Abaye, lo l'didi kasha v'lo l'Rav Chisda kasha. It's not difficult to me, it's not difficult to Rav Chisda. L'didi lo kasha, according to me it's not a kasha. Sofo ketchila, so the end of the carbon is like the beginning of the carbon. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis.